what does it actually mean to speak like a leader? When I first started thinking about this years ago, I had this image in my head of someone very authoritative, commanding the room, speaking with this deep, powerful voice. And sure, that can be one form of leadership communication, but as I've grown and learned, I've realized that's really just one style. And honestly, it's not even the most effective one in most situations. Speaking like a leader is really about clarity, confidence, and connection. Let me break that down. Clarity means you know what you want to say, and you say it in a way that people can understand. You're not confusing people with jargon or talking in circles. You get to the point, but you do it in a way that's engaging. Confidence, and this is huge, is about believing in what you're saying and conveying that belief to others. But here's the catch. Confidence doesn't mean arrogance. It doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you're comfortable with what you know, comfortable saying, "I don't know," and comfortable making decisions even when things are uncertain. And finally, connection. This is the one that people forget the most. You can be the clearest, most confident speaker in the world, but if you're not connecting with your audience, whether that's one person or 1,000 people, your message isn't going to land. Connection is about empathy, about understanding who you're speaking to and what they need to hear. So when we talk about speaking like a leader throughout this episode, I want you to keep those three things in mind: clarity, confidence, and connection. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. One of the first things people notice when you speak is your voice itself, the tone, the pace, the overall presence you bring to your words. I remember early in my career, I was in this meeting with some senior executives, and I was so nervous. I started talking really fast, my voice went up like 3 octaves, and I could feel myself just spiraling. And you know what? Nobody took me seriously. It wasn't because my ideas were bad. Looking back, they were actually pretty solid, but because the way I delivered them made me sound unsure and, frankly, kind of frantic. So let's talk about tone first. Leaders tend to speak with what I call a grounded tone. It's not monotone, that's boring and disengaging, but it's steady, it's calm. Even when they're excited about something, there's this underlying steadiness that makes you feel like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. One trick I learned is to speak from your diaphragm, not your throat. When you speak from your throat, your voice tends to be higher and thinner. But when you breathe deeply and speak from your diaphragm, your voice naturally becomes richer and more authoritative. Try it right now. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, speak. You'll notice the difference. Now let's talk about pace. This is something I really had to work on. When we're nervous or excited, we tend to speed up, but leaders know how to use pace strategically. They slow down on important points. They pause, and we'll get to pauses in a minute because they're incredibly powerful. They speed up when they're building energy or excitement. Think about some of the most memorable speeches you've heard. I guarantee they weren't delivered at a constant pace. There was variation, there was rhythm. That's what keeps people engaged. And here's a pro tip. Slower is almost always better than faster. When in doubt, slow down. It gives you time to think. It gives your audience time to process, and it automatically makes you sound more confident and in control. Now, pauses. Oh man, pauses are magic. Most people are terrified of silence when they're speaking. They fill every gap with like. But leaders embrace the pause. They use it for emphasis. They use it to let important points sink in. They use it to gather their thoughts. I want you to try something this week. In your next conversation or meeting, after you make an important point, just stop. Don't rush to fill the silence. Count to 3 in your head and then continue. You'll be amazed at how much more powerful your words become. All right, so we've talked about how you sound. Now let's talk about what you actually say, your word choice and language patterns.
Leaders are very intentional with their language. They're not just throwing words out there hoping something sticks. Every word serves a purpose. Let me give you some examples. First, leaders use decisive language. Instead of saying, "I think maybe we should consider possibly looking into this," a leader says, "We need to explore this option." See the difference? One sounds wishy-washy. The other sounds clear and decisive. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be rigid or closed off to other ideas. You can still be collaborative while being decisive. For example, "I believe we should move forward with option A, but I want to hear everyone's thoughts first." Second, leaders use inclusive language. They say "we" more than "I," at least when they're talking about team achievements. "We accomplished this. We're going to tackle this challenge. We have an opportunity here." But, and this is important, good leaders flip that. They say "I made a mistake," not "we made a mistake" when they're responsible. They take ownership with their language. Third, leaders avoid qualifiers and hedging language. What do I mean by hedging? Things like, "I'm no expert, but this might be a stupid question," or "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry to bother you, but..." Every time you use one of these phrases, you're undermining your own authority before you've even made your point. Now, I'm not saying you should never apologize or acknowledge limitations, but be strategic about it. If you're not actually sorry, don't say sorry. If your question isn't stupid, don't call it stupid. I had to train myself out of this habit. I used to start so many sentences with "I just think." That word, just, it's so small, but it minimizes everything you say after it. Try removing it from your vocabulary for a week and see how much more powerful your statements become. Fourth, leaders ask powerful questions. Leadership isn't just about making statements. It's about asking questions that make people think, that open up conversations, that challenge assumptions in a constructive way. Instead of saying, "That won't work," a leader might ask, "What challenges do you foresee with this approach?" Instead of "That's a bad idea," they might say, "What led you to that conclusion? Help me understand your thinking." These kinds of questions do two things. They keep the conversation collaborative, and they often lead to better solutions because you're digging deeper rather than shutting things down.
Okay, we're about halfway through, and I want to shift gears a little bit, because here's the thing. Speaking like a leader isn't just about the words that come out of your mouth. It's about everything else, too. There's this famous study, you've probably heard of it, by Albert Mehrabian, that found that only 7% of communication is the actual words we use. 38% is our tone of voice, and 55% is body language. Now, those numbers have been debated and shouldn't be taken as absolute in every context, but the point stands. Nonverbal communication is huge. So even if we're talking about speaking, we have to talk about body language. Let's start with posture. Leaders tend to have what I call open posture. They stand or sit up straight, not rigid, but upright. Their shoulders are back. They take up space in a way that's confident but not aggressive. Compare that to someone who's slouching, who's making themselves small, who's crossing their arms defensively. What does that communicate? Insecurity, discomfort, maybe even hostility. I'll be honest with you, I struggled with this for a long time. I'm naturally a pretty introverted person, and my default was to make myself small. I'd slouch in my chair, I'd hunch my shoulders forward, I'd cross my legs and arms, and then I wondered why people weren't taking me seriously. It wasn't until someone gave me some feedback, pretty direct feedback actually, that I started working on this. And the crazy thing is, when I started changing my posture, I didn't just appear more confident to others, I actually felt more confident. There's real science behind this, by the way. It's called power posing, and it can actually change your hormone levels. Now let's talk about eye contact. This is a big one. Leaders maintain strong eye contact, not in a creepy, staring into your soul kind of way, but in a present, engaged way. When they're speaking to you, you feel like they have your full attention.
If you're speaking to a group, this means making eye contact with different people throughout the room, not just staring at your notes or at one person the whole time. If you're speaking to an individual, it means looking at them while they're speaking and while you're responding. Now, you can break eye contact occasionally. It's natural and actually helps prevent that creepy stare thing. But the majority of the time, you want to be making eye contact. One tip: if eye contact makes you really nervous, look at the bridge of someone's nose or their eyebrows. From their perspective, it looks like you're making eye contact, but it's less intense for you. Gestures are another important piece. Leaders use hand gestures naturally to emphasize points, to illustrate ideas, to bring energy to their communication. But, and this is key, they don't overdo it. They're not flailing around or making distracting movements. Their gestures are purposeful and measured. If you're someone who doesn't naturally gesture much, try bringing your hands above your waist when you speak. Just that simple change makes your gestures more visible and impactful. And if you're someone who gestures a lot, maybe too much, try grounding yourself by occasionally touching your fingertips together or holding one hand with the other. This gives your hands something to do without being distracting. Facial expressions matter too. Leaders' faces match their messages. If they're talking about something serious, they look serious. If they're celebrating a win, they smile. This might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people have a mismatch between their words and their expressions. I once worked with someone who would always smile when delivering bad news. I think it was a nervous habit, but it made them seem insincere and like they weren't taking the situation seriously. Your face has to align with your message.
All right, now let's get into some of the harder stuff. Because speaking like a leader isn't just about delivering great presentations or having smooth conversations when everything's going well. It's about how you handle the tough moments, the pushback, the disagreements, the difficult conversations. This is where a lot of people fall apart. I know I did early on. So let's talk about receiving pushback or criticism. When someone challenges you or disagrees with you, your natural instinct might be to get defensive. Mine certainly was. I'd feel my heart rate go up, I'd feel this need to justify myself immediately, and sometimes I'd even get a little aggressive in my response. But that's not how leaders respond. Leaders stay calm. They listen first. They seek to understand before they seek to be understood. Here's a framework I use: acknowledge, clarify, respond. Acknowledge: I hear what you're saying, or that's a valid concern. Clarify: just to make sure I understand, are you worried about X or Y? This shows you're actually listening and gives the other person a chance to clarify if you misunderstood. Respond: now you can address their concern. Here's why I believe this approach will work, or you're right, we should think about that more carefully. The key is that pause between receiving the pushback and responding. Don't react immediately. Take a breath, process, then respond thoughtfully. Now, what about giving difficult feedback? This is something a lot of people avoid because they don't want to be seen as mean or harsh. But avoidance isn't leadership. Leaders have the courage to have hard conversations. The trick is to be direct but kind. You can be honest without being brutal. You can be clear without being cruel. I like the format situation, behavior, impact, and path forward. For example, in yesterday's meeting, situation, when you interrupted Sarah multiple times, behavior, it prevented her from sharing her full idea and made the rest of the team uncomfortable. Impact. Going forward, I need you to be mindful of letting others finish their thoughts. Path forward. See how that's direct but not attacking. You're addressing a specific behavior, not making it personal, and you're providing a clear expectation for the future. Handling disagreements is another big one. Leaders don't shy away from disagreement. In fact, they often welcome it because they know that's how better ideas emerge. But they know how to disagree productively. Instead of, "you're wrong," they say, "I see it differently and here's why." Instead of, "that'll never work," they ask,
What if we approached it this way instead? They frame disagreements as collaborative problem solving, not as battles to be won. And here's something that took me way too long to learn. It's okay to change your mind. If someone presents a compelling argument, it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness, to say, you know what, I hadn't thought about it that way. You've convinced me.
All right, we're moving into one of my favorite topics, storytelling. If you want to speak like a leader, you need to become a good storyteller. Because here's the thing, people don't remember data. They don't remember bullet points. They don't remember long lists of facts. They remember stories. Think about the leaders who've inspired you. I bet they told stories. Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream. Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone. Your favorite teacher explaining a complex concept through a relatable example. Stories stick. So how do you incorporate storytelling into your leadership communication? First, use personal anecdotes. When you're making a point, illustrate it with a story from your own experience. It makes you more relatable and it makes your point more concrete. For example, instead of saying, persistence is important, you might say, when I first started in this industry, I applied to 50 companies and got rejected by 49 of them, but that 50th one gave me my start, and I wouldn't be here without it. That's why I never give up on a goal, and that's why I'm confident we can overcome this challenge. Second, use the hero's journey structure. This is a classic storytelling framework. There's a challenge or problem, there's struggle, and there's resolution or transformation. When you're pitching an idea or explaining a strategy, frame it this way. Here's the challenge we're facing, the problem. Here's what we've tried and the obstacles we've encountered, the struggle. Here's how we're going to overcome this, the solution. And here's what success will look like, the transformation. This structure is compelling because it mirrors how we experience life. It creates tension and then resolution, which keeps people engaged. Third, use vivid sensory language. Instead of saying, it was a difficult situation, say, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down, trying to decide if I should jump. Instead of sales increased significantly, say we went from a quiet office where phones barely rang to a place where every line was lit up and we were literally running out of chairs for new team members. Paint a picture. Make people see what you're describing. Fourth, keep your stories concise. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They start telling a story and it just goes on and on and on, and people lose interest. A good story in a professional setting should be 1 to 3 minutes max, usually. Get in, make your point, get out. You can always add more detail if people ask questions. And finally, practice your stories. Just like any other skill, storytelling gets better with practice. Think about the key stories you want to have in your repertoire. Stories that illustrate your values, your experiences, your lessons learned, and practice telling them out loud, multiple times. I actually keep a little note on my phone with story ideas and key points I want to hit. That way, when I'm in a conversation or a meeting and an opportunity comes up to share a relevant story, I'm ready.
Now, we've covered a lot of techniques and strategies, but I want to make something really clear. Speaking like a leader doesn't mean copying someone else or putting on a persona that isn't you. This is something I struggled with for a long time. I'd watch these charismatic leaders, the ones who could command a room effortlessly, who always had the perfect thing to say, and I'd try to be like them. I'd try to adopt their mannerisms, their way of speaking, their style. And you know what? It didn't work. It felt fake because it was fake. I wasn't being me. The truth is, there's no one right way to speak like a leader. There are introverted leaders who speak quietly but powerfully. There are extroverted leaders who bring incredible energy. There are analytical leaders who lead with data and logic. There are visionary leaders who lead with emotion and inspiration. The key is finding your authentic voice and then amplifying the best parts of it. So how do you do that? First, understand your natural communication style. Are you naturally more formal or casual, more analytical or emotional, more direct or diplomatic? There's no right answer. These are just different styles, and each can be effective in the right context. The goal isn't to completely change your style. It's to be aware of it and adapt when necessary. If you're naturally very direct, that's great, but you might need to soften your approach in certain sensitive situations. If you're naturally very diplomatic, that's wonderful, but you might need to be more direct when clarity and speed are critical. Second, identify your values and let them guide your communication. When you speak from a place of genuine belief and values, it comes through. People can sense authenticity. They can also sense when you're just saying what you think they want to hear or what's politically safe. I made a decision a few years ago that I was going to be more open about my values in my professional communication. Not in a preachy way, but just being honest about what matters to me. Things like integrity, continuous learning, treating people with respect. And you know what? Some people didn't resonate with it, and that's fine. But the people who did connect became much more engaged and loyal because they knew where I stood. Third, be willing to show vulnerability. This might seem counterintuitive. We often think leaders need to project strength and certainty all the time. But actually, some of the most powerful leadership communication includes vulnerability. Saying, "I don't know," when you don't know. Admitting when you've made a mistake. Sharing when you're struggling with a decision. This doesn't make you weak, it makes you human, and it gives others permission to be human too. Brené Brown has done incredible research on this, and her findings are clear. Vulnerability is actually a strength in leadership, not a weakness. Fourth, get feedback and be willing to evolve. Ask people you trust, how do I come across when I communicate? What are my strengths? Where could I improve? And then actually listen to what they tell you without getting defensive. I do this regularly, and I learn something every time. Sometimes it's small things. I didn't realize I had this habit of saying "actually" all the time, which could come across as condescending. Sometimes it's bigger things. I wasn't sharing my reasoning enough, so people didn't understand why I was making certain decisions. Your authentic voice isn't static. It evolves as you grow and learn, and that's a good thing.
All right, we're coming into the home stretch here. We've covered so much, and I want to make sure you leave this episode with some concrete things you can start doing right away. Because here's the reality. You can listen to 100 podcasts about speaking like a leader, but unless you actually practice these skills, nothing's going to change. So let me give you some practical exercises you can start this week. Exercise 1. Record yourself. I know. Most people hate hearing their own voice on recording. I get it. But this is one of the most valuable things you can do. Record yourself in your next meeting or presentation. Just audio is fine, but video is even better if you're comfortable with it. Then watch or listen to it. Don't be too hard on yourself, but notice. Do you speak too fast or too slow? Do you use a lot of filler words? Does your tone match your message? How's your posture and body language if you recorded video? Just awareness is the first step to improvement. Exercise 2. The pause practice. For the next week, in every conversation or meeting, practice pausing after making an important point. Count to 3 in your head before continuing. It's going to feel uncomfortable at first. That's normal, but I promise it will make your communication more powerful. Exercise 3. Eliminate one verbal tick. Pick one thing you do that undermines your communication. Maybe it's starting sentences with, "I just think." Maybe it's saying constantly. Maybe it's ending statements with an upward inflection like they're questions. Pick one, and for the next week, focus on catching yourself and correcting it.
Don't try to fix everything at once. That's overwhelming. Just pick one. Exercise 4. Tell one story per day. Practice your storytelling. In every day this week, find at least one opportunity to tell a short story to illustrate a point. It could be in a team meeting, a one-on-one conversation, even at dinner with friends or family. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Exercise 5. Ask someone you trust, a colleague, a mentor, a friend, to give you honest feedback about your communication style. Ask specific questions. What's one thing I do well when I communicate? What's one thing I could improve? Do I come across the way I intend to? And when they give you feedback, just listen. Thank them. Don't explain or defend. Just take it in and think about it. Exercise 6. Watch great communicators. Find leaders you admire who are good communicators and study them. Watch their TED Talks, their interviews, their presentations. What do they do well? What can you learn from them? But remember, you're learning from them, not copying them. Take what resonates and makes sense for you and leave the rest. Finally, exercise 7. Practice power posing. Before your next important conversation or presentation, do a power pose for 2 minutes. Stand up tall, put your hands on your hips, or raise them above your head like you just won a race. Take up space. Research shows this can actually boost your confidence. I do this before important meetings all the time. I'll go to the bathroom, close the stall, and do power poses for a couple of minutes. People would probably think I'm crazy if they knew, but it works.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about some common mistakes I see people make when they're trying to improve their leadership communication. Because knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. Pitfall 1. Trying to sound smart instead of being clear. I see this all the time. People use big words, complex jargon, convoluted sentences, all in an attempt to sound intelligent or impressive. But you know what's actually impressive? Being able to explain complex ideas in simple terms. Einstein supposedly said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I think that's right. The best leaders can take complicated concepts and make them accessible to everyone. Pitfall 2. Talking too much. Leaders know when to talk and when to listen. If you're dominating every conversation, if you're always the loudest voice in the room, you're not leading effectively. You're just talking. Remember that listening is also a form of leadership communication. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask a good question and then shut up and really listen to the answer. Pitfall 3. Being inconsistent. Your words have to match your actions. If you talk about the importance of work-life balance, but you're sending emails at midnight and expecting responses, people will notice that contradiction. If you talk about valuing everyone's input, but you never actually implement anyone's suggestions, people will stop believing you. Consistency between what you say and what you do is crucial for credibility. Pitfall 4. Over-relying on email or text. Look, I get it. Written communication is easier for some people. You can edit it, you can think about it, you don't have to deal with the awkwardness of face-to-face conversations. But leaders know that some conversations need to happen in person or at least over the phone or video call. Difficult conversations, emotional topics, complex issues, these shouldn't be handled over email. Don't hide behind your keyboard. Sometimes you need to have that real-time verbal conversation. Pitfall 5. Forgetting your audience. This is huge. You can be the best speaker in the world, but if you're not tailoring your message to your audience, it's not going to land. Are you speaking to executives who want the bottom line? Engineers who want technical details? Frontline employees who want to know how this affects their day-to-day work? Your message needs to adapt to your audience. Pitfall 6. neglecting the emotional component. Some people, especially those from more analytical backgrounds, focus entirely on logic and facts. And while that's important, you can't forget that people make decisions emotionally and justify them rationally. Great leaders connect both to hearts and minds. They use both logic and emotion. They understand that sometimes a story or an appeal to values is more persuasive than any amount of data.
All right, we are coming to the end of our time together today, and I just want to bring this all home. Speaking like a leader isn't about being perfect. It's not about never making mistakes or always having the right answer. It's not about being the loudest or the most charismatic person in the room. It's about communicating with clarity so people understand you. It's about communicating with confidence so people trust you. And it's about communicating with connection so people feel valued and heard. It's about being intentional with your words, your tone, your body language, your presence. It's about telling stories that resonate, asking questions that open up conversations, and having the courage to have difficult discussions when necessary. And most importantly, it's about being authentic. It's about finding your voice, not someone else's, and using it to inspire, influence, and lead. Here's what I want you to remember. You don't need to wait for a leadership title to start speaking like a leader. You can start right now, in your next conversation, in your next meeting, in your next email even. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice these skills. Every conversation is a chance to show up as the leader you want to become. And yeah, you're gonna mess up sometimes. You're gonna say the wrong thing or trip over your words or let a slip out when you were trying to pause powerfully. That's okay. That's part of the process. Be patient with yourself. The leaders you admire, they've all had those moments too. The difference is they kept working at it. They kept practicing. They kept growing. And you can too. So here's your homework if you want to think of it that way. Pick one thing from this episode, just one, and commit to working on it this week. Maybe it's pausing more. Maybe it's eliminating a verbal tic. Maybe it's telling one story per day. Whatever resonates with you, start there. And then next week, pick something else. Build on it. Layer these skills on top of each other. And I'd love to hear how it goes for you. Reach out. Let me know what you're working on, what's clicking, what's challenging. I really do read everything, and your stories inspire me. Before we go, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for spending this hour with me. I know your time is valuable, and the fact that you chose to spend it here, learning and growing, that means everything. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with someone who might benefit from it, a colleague, a friend, anyone who's working on their communication skills. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future episodes. We've got some great stuff coming up. All right, that's all for today. Until next time, remember, your voice matters. Use it wisely, use it powerfully, and use it to make a difference. Take care, everyone.